Hey, I'm Gus.
And I ain't your average sicko. I'm dead just like disco, and my bank account is in fact 000. I'm Charlie, and today we're talking about Cyberpunk Edgerunners, one of my favorite shows ever made.
Just like Disco, we are not alive, and this show is kind of an anomaly to me because it takes two things. Cyberpunk 2077, which I'm vaguely aware of, I've heard of, has a lot of problems as a video game, and it takes Studio Trigger, something that I'm conflicted about, but I'm very aware of, and somehow it takes both of those things and turns them into one amazing thing.
I mean, this show is like such an incredibly important piece of media to me, and I'm gonna wax lyrical about it just very briefly. But I first watched this at a time in which I was kind of grappling with like my identity and kind of figuring out who I actually am. I really found that a lot of the themes at the heart of this story and the wider cyberpunk genre like really relatable and really spoke to me. This was my introduction to cyberpunk as a genre. And you know when you watch something or you experience something and you're like, oh, this is my shtick, this is my thing. Like, I had such a huge smile on my face when I was rewatching this show for this recording because so much of it speaks to me.
Like we were saying in our Nimona video, some things exist as part of an ongoing conversation, and this very much exists at the vertex of cyberpunk as a genre and anime as a medium.
Episode 1, Let You Down, we're introduced to David Martinez, our scrappy protagonist.
He starts in a position where, like, David could potentially go on to, like, you know, beat the system, be exceptional. Like, that's what his mom thinks of him. Like, he kind of has the outlook of somebody who is pretty smart and is pretty genius, but because of the systemic barriers in his way, is struggling, and sometimes he doesn't think it could be worth it, which is a really tragic position to place the main character. It's not atypical for a protagonist, but what I like about this show is that this isn't a story of somebody who beats the odds because the narrative is in his favor. This is a story of someone who realistically has to grapple with a system that is so much bigger than him, and the hand of the author is not, it's not giving him any easy outs.
Exactly, and I think like what's really interesting and like again like for me was particularly relatable about David as a protagonist was this, we see through like his relationship with his mum Gloria that like he's kind of feels like boxed in by the weight of her expectations on him. Like she and he both kind of know that in this like hyper corporate world that kind of conforming to it and becoming a part of that system is kind of the path of least resistance, but you sacrifice a lot of yourself in order to get there.
Yeah, it's very like, spiritually and physically, David sort of becomes a ship of Theseus throughout the entire show. He's doing all of this modification to be a version of himself that can change the world into something that would better fit what he wants it to be. So it's this fascinating like push and pull of identity and society and like where the self kind of breaks and crumbles, but where the new self is constructed.
Yeah, he's constantly trying to forge his own identity throughout the story. He wants like to do right by other people, do right by his mum, do right by his friends in the crew that we later meet. It ends up costing him so much more than he like ever could have imagined, because that is how harsh and how brutal it is to live in Night City.
Yeah, exactly. He is not only a product of his environment, but he literally becomes more and more of a like product TM of his environment as the city gets its claws into him.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Night City it's ruled by the Eurodollar, I mean, we see that so clearly in like the first episode where Trauma Team, the rapid response like medical unit, they don't even bother to save Gloria's life after the pair of them get into a car accident because she's not insured with them. They have like this discount like cut rate medical package where David can't even have visitation while she's in hospital, and it ends like because like as a cost-cutting measure she dies because they don't think she's like worth, or she don't think she's good for the extra money that it would cost them to keep her on life support. It's so horrific and so unforgiving.
I think what's especially horrific about Gloria's situation is that she also is a medic who could have gone on to save more lives working that same job, but she's not treated as an exception. She's disposable because she was dollar signs and not a life.
Because the first episode is pretty relentless on David. He, in his desperation, he gets pushed to chip the Sandevistan. It enhances his speed, but it comes at this cost of a part of himself. Straight away, and I think in the second episode, we immediately see it's causing him like direct bodily harm because he doesn't use immunoblockers. He forgets to do it, and it's this cyberware in the way that it's kind of utilized as not just as a cool facet of world building, but also a cool and like a cool action thing, but like in a kind of abstract, kind of metaphorical way for chipping away at a person and chipping away at a person's humanity.
Yeah, the Sandevistan itself is such a powerful symbol of like the moment that David takes like basically a keepsake from his mother, but a side of her that she like explicitly didn't want him to get involved in. And this opens him into the world of crime. What I love about the foreshadowing in this show is that as like David puts on the goggles to like live out the last moments of these cyber psychos, people who have chromed up and gone too far and kind of just lost their mind, like seeing him veer towards that in real life makes it kind of like you see through their eyes for entertainment, but how long is it until you're looking through your own eyes and seeing the same thing?
Well, again, like similar to how cyberware is handled in the story, the handling of cyberpsychosis as a condition is so fascinating. It kind of serves as this. I made a note that says like it's interesting how it kind of acts as this ultimate and terrifying loss of self. It turns the person suffering from it into a complete monster, to the point where the only thing that can like stop them is MaxTac, the militant arm of Night City. The way it's delved into when we see characters that we know and get to spend a lot of time with throughout the story, it makes that idea that like, oh, this person who has like done so much in pursuit of trying to preserve themselves, but in doing so they're also losing more and more of themselves through implants and stuff. It makes it all the more heartbreaking to see when they go over the edge and when they become this kind of horrifying shadow of their former selves.
Yeah, so the thing is, like, David, he's changing, like, on his own because he's kind of had enough, but the thing that pushes him to really get involved in the criminal world is his relationship with Lucy.
Believe me, David, I get it, buddy. I get it. As much as it was hard to not get swept up in the, oh god, I love David and Lucy and I want what they have minus the kidnapping and tragic death, I do love like the chemistry and the nuanced evolving relationship between the two of them. And I love Lucy as a character, independent of David as well.
David's story is like straightforward tragedy, but when we meet the crew, we get this glimpse into a world where like maybe they will all make it because they're looking out for each other, right? Like at the start, it feels really like idyllic. It reminded me a little bit of Berserk during the Golden Age saga when Guts is hanging out with the Band of the Hawk. There's this feeling of like camaraderie and like maybe this time with these people this world isn't going to be so bad. Maybe we'll all make it.
Well, it's interesting you say about like that and the crew, because like I think what might hands down be my favorite episode of this show is episode 4, because like we get to see through like montage to do like visual storytelling and like rapid character development, we see David bonding with everyone. Like he then has this like found family among the crew. This might be the closest we see to like David being like fully happy. And then the end of that episode, Pilar gets killed, and it all goes downhill from there.
Those good times cannot last in a show like this because the path that they're on that allows them to afford a bit of freedom in Night City catches up with them because the city does not like people having that freedom.
We also get better acquainted with them and how they function as a team. Specifically, what them as individuals bring to the crew. Individualism, like in the face of corporate greed and a horrible oppressive corporate world.
And what I like about this is that you start off with like David being really invested in this crew because he wants to get closer to Lucy and he earns Maine's respect, but those two relationships go south in two different ways. Maine serves as a kind of tragic foreshadowing of the path David's on.
Something that particularly stood out to me on a rewatch that I think I'd always kind of noticed or always been aware of, but had never like actually dedicated a serious amount of thought to, is the interesting like similarities between Maine and David in terms and how it's kind of externalized in like physical similarities. Like we see when Maine starts to slip into cyberpsychosis, we see kind of flashbacks of him when he was a lot younger, kind of jogging in the Badlands outside of Night City. Interestingly, like, stature-wise, he's very similar to David before the time jump that takes place in episode 7. And I think that's really interesting because, again, it externalizes this idea that these two are, like, very, very similar in terms of they kind of pursue, again, a sense of self through cyberware and a sense of individualism through their implants. And again, it's not meant to be taken like 100% literally like the flashback, but this idea that Maine is out in the desert and there's nothing but none of the city is around him, it's just this open plain before him. It really conveys this idea of like, you gotta try and escape, you gotta get out while you can. I mean, like Kiwi says later in the show, whether you're looking for a way out or a way up, it doesn't matter. Night City will get you eventually if you don't run. And you just gotta keep running.
It speaks to the actual, like, punk sort of mentality of provoke, change yourself, be loud, be boisterous. You know, David probably, if he had stuck to the straight and narrow path, would not have gone the distance. But on some level, failure is what the system would have wanted from him. And that really doesn't make it noble, because a system where there needs to be, like, extreme exceptions is not a just one. Maybe David's, like, you know, resilience to cyber technology isn't that special. Maybe 1 in a million doesn't really mean all that much in the scope of billions. But, like, he took what he had and gave it a real honest shot, went to the top of the tower.
He went to the top of Arasaka Tower. He gets a drink at the Afterlife. I know you haven't played the game, Gus, but like the Afterlife is like the Merc bar in Night City, and we see it a couple times in the show as well. But one of like the interesting like little tidbits of lore is that like mercenaries who have like become famous and become legends of Night City and die get a drink named after them at the Afterlife, and they added one in game after the show came out, which is called the David Martinez. Even that, you know, the idea of like that someone's entire life then just gets reduced to like, here's a thing you can buy. Here's a commemorative drink that you can buy for this person. It's like, oh wow, Night City fucking sucks.
It's a capitalist realist piece that imagines that there can be an alternative, but isn't going to butter us up and make us believe that that's not going to come on like tons and tons of scrap metal of all of the people who tried to fight before to make it happen. Like, we, in the modern day, anybody who is any flavor of progressive and wants to build a better world, we are constantly climbing over a mountain of historical corpses to get to that better future. And it's bleak, and it's full of struggle, and we might not even see that better world within our lifetime. But that's why stuff like Cyberpunk exists, to remind us of the truth of that, but also to not give up hope, to keep fighting so that somewhere, someday, someone's going to beat the system.
It's summed up perfectly in like Maine's final words. He tells David to just keep running because we need to. We gotta keep going. We can't let these fucking corporate bastards like rob us of the things that make us human, and that, you know, the idea that one day things can actually be better, because, you know, the minute we accept that, or, you know, there's no point in trying, the system cannot be toppled, that's when they win. That's when they get us. And I, for one, am not gonna stand by and let that fucking happen to me.
Exactly. And honestly, as I mentioned before, you know, I have kind of an on-again, off-again relationship as a fan of Studio Trigger. I think that my biggest criticism that would be the most relevant in regards to their other shows in relation to this show is that so often they are too hopeful in a way that seems almost insulting. I think it takes real maturity to do what they did with this show, where it's just like reckless individuality will not allow you to win every time, but it is still worth doing, because fighting that good fight is not about results. It's about what message it sends.
And it's I think that's like it's a great function as well of this being a prequel to 2077 because it's set a couple of years before. Obviously, in that game and during that time, this civilization, this system is still ongoing and it still exists, and it doesn't get, because David and co can't topple it as much as you hope and you wish that they could.
I think the real cyber psychos are the people who think that there's going to be like a season 2 of this, or that David's story is like ongoing, because like that is the most absurd, like baffling, like how could you not understand
takes. The amount of stupid like people have been like, oh, but what if Trauma Team came and picked up David and Rebecca and they were both revived? And I'm like,
yeah.
Were you watching the show, for fuck's sake? Trauma Team is meant to be ludicrously expensive.
Yeah, what if they meet the tandem war elephant from Adventure Time and they fire laser beams that destroy capitalism from the ground up, and then they institute a utopia where everybody is robots and immortal and there's no cyber sickness. Like, get real.
Yeah.
Like, that's not an interesting story. That doesn't say anything about anything.
And it's also not what this story is about at all. Like, it's so
exactly.
antithetical to what Edgerunners is. Because it's about so much more than, oh, let's see the cool character, live forever. And this is why, this is why I love, or another reason why I love this show so much, is because it dares to only need one season to tell a single closed narrative. It is a complete story, start to finish, and you don't need any more. We don't need like a second season. I don't even think it needs to be an anthology series, honestly. Like, I've heard that idea floated, and on the one hand I could be like, that's kind of interesting, but at the same time, this show, as it exists, says anything and everything you could within the confines of this genre, this setting, uses its characters to like their fullest to say that, and I think anything else that came after it would feel like a cheap retread or it would feel like product. It would feel like corporate product.
So that's the thing. Like, let me sort of borrow a metaphor from like the show's literary language. The idea of like a full, complete story that you take lessons from and kind of slot into your like worldview and like how you'll go forward. Like, that finished story taught me something. It redefined how I live my life. This other finished story is doing the same thing. And then like bit by bit, you sort of like, move forward and you kind of form a gestalt that is still authentically you, but changed through your experiences. And I guess in this case, cyberpsychosis will be completely giving in to like corporate programming and making media your entire personality, which does happen. And it's the thing we want to avoid while we're edge running.
Exactly. Well, that's the thing. Yeah. That's why I always say that this show in particular fundamentally like changed me as a person, and for the better, I like to think. I did just want to talk as well, like very quickly, about the finale, because I've kind of like I've watched a lot of supplementary material about this show, and one of the things that has come up a couple times is people calling into question like whether or not it qualifies as punk, because the ending is like, and I don't agree with this take, but the ending is like saving, quote unquote, like a damsel in distress. I don't particularly think that that's the case. I think like the final battle going on throughout that finale is, as well as like an attempt to save Lucy's life, is also an attempt for David to try and claw back any scrap of his remaining humanity. And he's kind of like throughout the episode faced with reminders of like what kind of drove him to this point, like all the people that whose dreams he's tried to live and chase for them while never being able to truly forge his own.
And to go off of that, I think what is so poetic about that like shot of Lucy on the moon is that this is like, it's symbolic of David essentially realizing that like he is gone beyond recognition, but there is still like a space in the world for someone to have lived the better life that he could have lived. And that happens to be her. He gives everything he has so that she can live out her dream.
Absolutely. He wants to save her, not only because like he loves her obviously, but like so that she can survive and see her dream of escaping Night City through. Like, even if it means he dies as a result of it. And it's that kind of final selfless, defiant act that, in a way, you know, although he does ultimately lose himself, and although he does ultimately die, that final act of David, it's like one of the most human things that he does throughout the entire show. And it's kind of this posthumous victory because he succeeds in getting Lucy to safety, which is, again, he gives her that chance. He gives her that chance to go and, like, you know, to make it to the moon. And he just wishes that he could, you know, go there with her, but, you know, he knows he can't. He knows he's too far gone.
Exactly. And not to get, like, you know, overly bleak about, like, you know, our own real world, but sometimes there are just situations where people have to sacrifice everything to make sure somebody makes it. Somebody, like, that isn't them makes it. Like, that's what we're all fighting for, right? For future generations, for, like, you know, anyone who's a parent, you're fighting for your kid to live in a better world. Like, people are fighting for their siblings to live in a better world. People are fighting for their friends and found family to live in a better world. Like, none of this means that Lucy didn't have agency as a character. What it means is that in the text of this show, neither David or Lucy had full agency in their lives, and together, one of them got to the moon.
Yeah, and I Really Want to Stay at Your House is still the bop of the century. Such a good song.
Hell yeah. That was Cyberpunk Edgerunners. Thank you so much again for joining me here on the channel, Charlie.
That's all right. Always a pleasure.
Remember, viewers, we are very close to that 100K, so subscribe to this channel. We are not alive, and we will soon reach that 100K together.
Hell yeah. Just keep running to 100K.
Just keep running to 100K.